Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Paul, I'm with the Dicey Review, and today we're going to be learning how to play 11 from Portal Games. This is a 1 to 4 player game where each player takes on the role of someone managing a football or soccer club over the course of 6 weeks. You can do things like upgrade your stadium infrastructure, hire different staff or players, and hopefully win matches on match day by using clever tactics. How does the game play? Well, let's get to the table and find out. So I do want to quickly mention that this copy of the game is the Game Found Edition, which may look slightly different with some of the components that you see if you bought this game in a retail store. I'm going to focus on the core gameplay, however, and not look at any of the expansions, so hopefully this video will still translate no matter what version of the game you bought. 11 comes with all of the components that you see here, including a number of board meeting cards, objective cards, staff cards, director cards, sponsor cards, opponent cards, tactic cards, the opponent dice on a 12-sided die, a number of players separated into veterans, youngsters, and regular players, a number of different resource markers. The game also comes with 4 match boards, a number of strength, weakness, injury, suspension, and reminder tokens, a number of stadium infrastructure tokens, opponent team markers, a stage marker, multiplier tokens, as well as double-sided victory point tokens, 4 club boards, 4 stadium boards. The game also comes with a number of different player components in the different player colors, as well as a league table board. To begin setup, you'll first lay out what the game calls the transfer area. To do this, first separate out the player cards into 3 different decks. First, place the player deck out in the play area with its untrained side face up. You can tell that the cards are on their untrained side because they won't have these stars in the top left corner and they won't have this gold background. Then deal out the top 5 cards from the player deck to create a display. Make sure to shuffle the veteran cards and the youngster cards and place them nearby as well. After shuffling the staff deck, place it face down in the middle of the table and deal out the top 5 cards to create a display. Then do the same thing with the sponsor deck, once again dealing out the top 5. Next, shuffle and place the board meeting deck near the play area as shown. Shuffle and place the objective deck next to the board meeting deck, and shuffle and place the tactic deck next to that. Then separate out all of the opponent cards into 4 different divisions based on the division symbol on the bottom of the card. Once you've separated out these cards into each of their division stacks, place them near the play area. Next, you'll need to make sure that you place all of the resource markers, as well as the various victory point, injury, suspension, strength tokens, etc., and place those near the play area where all players can easily reach them. You'll also need to make sure that all of the stadium infrastructure tiles are nearby as well. Once this setup has been done, the player who most recently scored a goal can become the first player, or alternatively you can decide this randomly. That player would receive the stage marker, and then you could move on to player board setup. There will be 3 different boards that players will each have and manage, the first being their stadium board, which is shown here. The next will be their club board, which is shown here, and finally their match board, which is shown here. And make sure to place the office marker below the office track. But for the club board, first, whoever was selected as the start player will take the stage marker and place it in the slot for Monday. Then each player will take all of their stat markers and place them in space 2 on all of the appropriate stat spaces. Next, you'll need to shuffle the director deck and then deal out 4 director cards to each player. Once players have their 4 director cards, they'll then perform a draft, where they will select 1 director to place on their board, and then pass the remaining 3 directors to the player to their left. Players will then choose from the 3 that are passed to them and pass the remaining 2 to their left. Players will then choose from the remaining 2, and the one that they don't choose will simply be discarded. There are a few things to point out about how the director cards will impact you throughout the game. Director cards, first and foremost, when you select them, will alter your starting stats, and you'll need to adjust those stats after you select each director. So for instance, in this example, Our starting stats would increase by 1 on the green track thanks to this director, 1 on the red track thanks to this director, and 1 on the blue track thanks to this director. It's also possible that stats might be reduced by a particular director. Directors might also have bonuses, features, or actions that you can perform throughout the game. Actions will be provided by some directors or some staff that you might have, and some features will give you bonuses throughout the game as described on the card. Bonuses are things that would happen right away when the director is selected. For instance, this bonus says that right away you would draw 3 staff cards and then hire one of those staff cards for free, discarding the others. For instance, the player could draw these 3 staff cards and hire one of them without paying the cost listed in the top left. We'll go over more details about this in future rounds. We'll go over more details about this later in the video, but it's also important to note that staff may also give immediate bonuses and provide actions that players can take throughout the game as well. Let's say, for instance, that this player hired this resource manager, which would increase their green stat by 1 more. It's also important to note that directors will have certain preferences or things that they will focus on based on the color of their dice. Directors that focus heavily on yellow dice will be more interested in cash, stadium developments, and contracting sponsors, whereas directors that focus heavily on blue dice will be more interested in caring for players, youngsters, tactics, and the fitness of the team. And directors that focus heavily on red dice will be more interested in the fan base, the staff, and the club operations. And it's also important to note that there are some directors that are very balanced between the 3 different focuses. Next, each player would place a first trainer card beneath their board in the staff location. These cards are double-sided, so you can pick whichever side you prefer. Then, players will place their club emblem here in the top left side of their match board. Players will place their 2 score markers on the 2 different match tracks. And then they'll need to decide which division they want to play in. There's 3 different levels of difficulty that players can play. The easiest and recommended is playing with cards from Division 3 and 3-2 here. Before the game, all of the players will decide together which division they want to play, and then each select cards from the appropriate stacks. If players wanted to play a medium difficulty, they would select from Divisions 3-2 and 2-1. And if they wanted to play the hardest difficulty, they would select from Divisions 1 and 2-1. In our example game, we're going to choose the medium difficulty, so each player would randomly select 3 cards from each division, 3 and 3-2. And the cards selected would need to be different. Players would place the card from Division 3-2, or the more advanced division, on the bottom of the stack face down, and then they would place the 3 cards that they selected from Division 3 on top of those. Any of the unused division cards can be placed back in the box along with the director cards that weren't picked. Then each player will draw 1 veteran and 1 youngster card, and then place them in the appropriate slots of the match board depending on the illustration that shows where they should go on their card. For instance, this player will go in the bottom section because of this highlighted area here, whereas this player goes up with the forwards. Then begin to place out your jersey markers onto the match board. If there's any player that has a specific symbol, like this number 10 here, make sure that the symbol is matching the correct marker on that player's card. Some players will be attackers and some players will be defenders, so just make sure that the appropriate symbol is showing. You'll then need to place out the rest of the jerseys in these spaces on the board. When you're done, just make sure that there are 5 jerseys that show the attacker symbol and 5 jerseys that show the defender symbol. You'll also have some jerseys that don't have a particular number on them. Just make sure that those are near the play area so that you can use them during the game if needed. As a quick note, you will use these jersey markers if you have a player that's in the game that has no number, like a youngster, or any particular player cards that have a number above 11. You can simply substitute one of these jerseys without a number should that situation arise. Also, each player will draw 2 objective cards, look at them and keep one of them and discard the other. You can look at the card that you selected at any time, but just make sure that it's a secret from the other players. These objective cards will give you goals that you can reach at the end of the game for a total of up to 4 points. Each player will also draw 1 basic tactic card and keep that near their play area as well. Make sure that each player gathers 1 basic formation card in addition to the objective card that they've selected. Then players will place their maintenance markers on the appropriate spaces of their track based on how many of each particular item they have. These may change based on what your directors have done. For instance, most players only start with 1 staff, but thanks to one of our directors, we've actually started with 2. It's also important to note that each player would start with a 4 on their stadium track, as there are 4 pre-printed stadium upgrades on each player's stadium board, 2 stands and 2 ad boards. Finally, players will set up the league board near the transfer area. This league board is where you'll move different club and opponent markers to indicate different wins and losses of all of the teams. Players will score victory points based on their position on the league table at the end of the game. To set up the league table, first, the player marker of any of the players in the game will be placed on space 0 of the league table. Then, players will place all of the opponent player markers that relate to your current selected division on space 0 as well. In our Division 3 and Division 3-2 decks, these are the 8 teams that are listed. Finally, you'll place the 3 opponent dice and then you're ready to play. Now we're going to be explaining this game using an example as if we were playing a 2-player game. However, due to the table space required, we only have the player components for one team set up. We'll keep this current setup to hopefully make it easier to explain the core concepts of the game. A game of 11 is played over the course of 6 rounds, known in the game as weeks. And each of these rounds or weeks contains 5 different days. These steps of the round, or weekdays, are tracked by the player with this marker who moves it along as each step is completed. The first step of each round will be Monday, when there will be production and the board meeting that takes place. Then, on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, there will be actions that players can take in player order, where you can interact with players, hire staff, invest in your different stadium infrastructure, and complete actions like that. Then, on the weekend, there will be a match day, and this is where you'll actually play a mini-game using tactic cards and different special abilities to try and win a match. And when that match is over, you would then resolve the consequences and then move on to the next week. At the end of the 6th round or week, you would then calculate all the victory points, and whoever has the most would be the winner. We'll look at each step of the round in detail so that you have a good idea of how to play, starting with the first step of each round, or Monday. Monday can be resolved by all players simultaneously, and on the Monday step of each round, there will be 2 steps that are completed, production and the board meeting. The first step will be production, where players gain resources depending on where their markers are on the 4 different tracks of the board. For instance, this player would gain 2 cash, 3 fan base, 4 operations, and 3 fitness. There are 4 different types of resources during the game that players will get. Fitness allows players to assign players to the match at the end of the week, and there may be other actions or effects that require fitness tokens. Operation resources allow players to take extra special actions during the week using their cards. Cash is used in many different ways, by spending it to hire players or staff or invest in infrastructure. And then fan base is used to be able to re-roll dice, or by assigning fans to the stands in order to earn money during match days. The next step that happens on Monday is the board meeting. The board meeting will be resolved simultaneously by all players. Each player will draw a board meeting card and place it face up in front of themselves on the table. Each board meeting card has a specific scenario that is presented and 3 possible outcomes based on how the directors will act during that scenario. And to decide how the directors act, a player will roll their die. For instance, if this player rolled a 3, the board of directors would vote for the particular color on the card that matches the 3. In this instance, it would be 2 blue to 1 yellow. And in that case, the blue option would resolve. Nothing would happen. If, however, a 1 had been rolled, the top yellow option would have been resolved, which would increase your cash production and decrease your fan base production. It's important to note that you'll see effects like this often on cards. And if you see a particular resource with a circle around it, like these 2 here, that means that you increase or decrease the production of that resource. Whereas if you see the resource on the bottom side of the card that has no circle around it, that means that you gain or lose that particular resource. You don't adjust the production on your tracks. It's also important to note that during this phase, if you want to, you can re-roll your die by spending one of your fan base resources. Fan base can always be spent to re-roll the result of dice as long as you have the fan base resource available. It's also important to note that if there's ever a tie, so for instance if each director had voted for a different color, you get to re-roll your die for free to break that tie. After each player has resolved their board meeting card and their production, the first player would then move this marker to the Tuesday space, and then the players would go into the Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday steps. During each week, or during the Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday phases, players will get to take actions beginning with the first player and then in clockwise direction, and on their turn during each of these phases, a player can take one basic action and, if they're able to and want to, can pay 2 operations resources to take an additional action on one of their cards. The 6 basic actions that players can perform are hire a player or youngster, sell a player or youngster, hire staff, contract a sponsor, build stadium infrastructure or their office, or use a card action. We'll look at each action in detail, beginning with hiring a player or a youngster. To take this action, players can choose one of the player cards that's in the 3 rightmost spaces of the display. These 2 players aren't available unless a special card action is used. Or the player can hire a youngster, which can be seen on the top of this stack here. Players will have a cost to hire them that's listed in the top left and will vary from 1 to 4 cash. They'll have a symbol that shows whether they play offense or defense, and they'll also have a symbol that indicates which section of the field they should be placed in. In addition to that, players may have bonuses that you gain when they're hired, and they also may have abilities that can either be activated by spending resources or when certain conditions are met. In this example, we'll say that the player decides to hire this player, Gonzalez. To do this, they have to spend 2 cash by returning it to the supply, and then the empty space left by the player purchase would then be filled in by sliding all of the cards to the right. If a player wants to hire a youngster, they don't get to select from a display, they simply draw the top card off of the youngster deck when hiring that player. When a player is hired, you need to flip the corresponding jersey marker to match the symbol, whether offense or defense, depending on the number of the player that you just hired. In this instance, this player is already set as a defender, so you don't have to do anything. And if you have more than one player with the same jersey number, only one of them is able to play in a match during match day. Through certain game effects on either cards or other actions, players will have the ability to train players. You'll know that a player is trained because it will have this gold star icon in the top left, and the profile of the player will be golden in the background as well. Most players will either improve their strength or gain better abilities when trained. For instance, this player right here, Gonzalez, loses 1 strength, but they also lose an ability that can potentially hurt players that they have to resolve before a match if this player is playing. So by training this player, they actually become better, even though their strength is slightly reduced. Youngsters will all have the same strength on their front side, but then on the back side will have varying levels of strength and potentially have abilities and challenges that they can meet to gain victory points at the end of the game. For instance, if we look at this youngster, even though they're not currently in the correct section, just for highlighting purposes, this youngster has this symbol and this symbol on their card, as well as an ability they can activate before the match by spending certain resources. If a player has this symbol right here with the whistle, when they play a match, you would place 1 victory point token on this space. This token will stay there until the end of the game unless this player is sold, which we'll look at next. But if this player is sold, you get to keep any victory point tokens that are on the player. If a player has this symbol on their card, if this player scores a goal during a match, you would place a victory point token there as well, and it's important to note that each space can only hold 1 victory point token for that player. Veterans will usually become weaker as far as strength is concerned when trained, but many of them will still maintain abilities or have certain effects that can still be helpful even though their strength has been lowered. It's also important to note that if a player is flipped, any tokens that were on that player would remain there. The next action that a player can take on their turn is to sell a player or youngster. To do this, a player would select one of the players or youngsters that they have on their team and discard that card to gain cash. There are a few special situations that can occur. Players would get 2 cash plus the value of that player's strength when selling the player. So in this instance, this player would gain 2 plus 2 cash by selling this trained youngster. It's also important to note that strength might be increased or decreased by certain tokens being on the cards, whether additional strength or weakness. In this example, this player would get 2 plus 4 cash for selling this veteran, and this player's sale would be reduced because of the weakness token. It's also important to note that player cards might have injured or suspended tokens through certain effects, and if you sell a player that has either of these tokens, you would get half of the value of the sale rounded down. If you're selling a youngster that has already achieved one of their certain goals and has a victory point token on that card, when you sell this player, you get to keep the victory point token for in-game scoring. The next action that a player can take on their turn is to hire staff. When hiring staff, it works in a very similar way to hiring players. You could only select from the 3 rightmost staff, and you would have to pay the cost listed in the top left of the card to hire that staff member. For instance, by paying 2 cash, this player could hire this fitness trainer. Any cards left would be shifted to the right, and then the empty space on the far left would then be filled in from the top card of the deck. Many staff cards, when you hire them, will have certain bonuses. For instance, whenever the player gains this fitness trainer, they get to increase their production of their fitness by 1, and in addition, if they have another fitness trainer, they would gain 1 fitness resource. This card also has an action that can be taken during the round, and staff cards will also have set collection bonuses that can be gained the more staff of a particular type you have. There are 5 different sets of staff cards indicated by the color in the top left here. For instance, at the end of the game, the player would get 3 victory points for having 2 cards within this green set. If a player were to have more than 3 green cards in this set, for instance, they wouldn't gain any additional victory points. The set bonus stops with the last circle. The next action that a player could take on their turn would be to contract a sponsor. To take this action, the player would first select one of the 3 rightmost sponsor cards in the display. For instance, the player could select this sponsor, and when you do this, like the other actions, you would shift any cards in the display down and refill from the deck to fill in the empty space. When selecting a sponsor card, players can choose to either select it as a t-shirt sponsor, an ad board sponsor, or a sponsor with this megaphone symbol. And there are different requirements and restrictions for each type. Sponsor cards will have different rewards depending on the level of sponsorship that you choose. For instance, this sponsorship card would give you 3 money if you choose it as a t-shirt sponsor, and in addition, you would get the bonus right here in the middle. If you choose it as an ad board sponsor, you would get the bonus right here or the bonus from the middle. You have to pick one. And if you choose them as a sponsor for this megaphone symbol, you would only get what's showing here. Now in this example, there's no reward, but this Portal Cookies sponsor would give you 5 cash for selecting this reward, for instance. Players can only have 1 t-shirt sponsor. They can have up to 3 ad board sponsors, and they can have an unlimited number of sponsors with this megaphone symbol. Let's say, for instance, that this player decides to take this sponsor as a t-shirt sponsor. They would immediately gain 3 cash. They would also get to increase a chosen stat by 1 and then gain 2 corresponding resource markers of that increased stat. And then the player would have to slide the card underneath this t-shirt symbol on their stadium board to show that they've already used that type of sponsor. And we'll say that as their middle bonus, they selected this stat to increase by 1 and then gain 2 of that resource. Once a stat is maxed out, if a player were to gain any more of that stat increase, they would instead simply gain 1 of the resource shown at the end of the track. For instance, if this player were to increase their fitness any more past 5, they would simply gain a fan base resource instead. As I said, players can have up to 3 ad board sponsors. And when you gain an ad board sponsor, it needs to be slid underneath the stadium board to show that this player has this sponsor. At the start of the game, you can only gain up to 2 ad board sponsors because you can only place a sponsor underneath an ad board if the ad board upgrade is there. Players start the game with 2 ad boards pre-printed on their stadium board, but they would have to upgrade their infrastructure and add a 3rd ad board before they could add another sponsor under that slot there. And we'll look at how to do that in later discussions. And it's important to note that if you contract the max number of sponsors that you can for a particular type, for instance, if this player already had this t-shirt sponsor and all 3 of their ad boards filled up, they couldn't get any more sponsors of those particular types, but players once again can always contract any number of sponsors and gain the megaphone symbol if they want to simply discard the sponsor card. The next action that a player can take on their turn is to build stadium infrastructure. This action will allow you to increase the effectiveness of your stadium and expand your stadium by investing in different infrastructure pieces. To do this, the player would choose any one of the available infrastructure tokens, pay 3 cash, and then you can place that infrastructure token on your player board. Infrastructure spaces like this that have a particular infrastructure upgrade printed have to have those tokens placed on them. For instance, stands number 3 would have to go here. All of the other infrastructure tokens can be placed wherever you want to on the player board. For instance, this one could be placed here. Infrastructure tokens, when built, will sometimes give an immediate bonus, like in this example. The player would immediately get to increase their stat by 1 for the green marker. And in addition to that, many infrastructure tokens at the end of the game will give you victory points, as well as allowing you to take better actions during match day or increase your ad board spaces, etc. Once placed, stadium infrastructure tokens can't be moved, but you are able to have multiple copies of each stadium infrastructure token if you want to, except for the ad boards and the stands. And make sure to adjust your space on the maintenance tracks anytime you acquire new stadium infrastructure upgrades, new staff cards, or players, etc. The next action that a player could take on their turn would be to build an office. And to build an office, a player would simply pay the cost indicated on the next empty space up on their office track, and then they would gain the indicated number of victory points at the end of the game depending on how high they are on their office track at game's end. For instance, to get to this first space, the player would pay 3 cash, and then they would be able to move to this first office track, which would guarantee that they would have 2 victory points at the end of the game. They could increase that by moving higher up the track before game's end. The last action that a player can perform on their turn during the week would be to activate the action on one of their cards that has an action symbol printed on it. Many staff cards and director cards will have actions that you can activate. Some actions will require you to spend a specific type of resource, which is shown in this left area to the left of the action text. For instance, to be able to take this action, you would have to first spend a fitness resource, but then you would be able to train one of your players, and then if you have 3 or more trained players, you would then gain a victory point. It's important to note that each card action can only be taken once per round, and after a card's action is taken, you would then rotate the card 90 degrees to show that that card action can't be taken again during the week. In addition to taking one of these 6 basic actions, players can, if they want to, spend 2 operation resources to take a bonus action after they've taken their standard action. The game refers to this bonus action as a paid action. It's important to note that if a player wants to take a paid action, in addition to paying these 2 resources, they have to only take an action that's listed on a card. They can't take one of the main actions like hiring a player or building infrastructure, etc. So in our previous example, if a player had chosen to activate this card as their main action, they could then, if they wanted to, pay 2 operations resources to then activate their resource manager, which would allow them to gain 2 resources of their choice. So for instance, they could choose cash, fan base, or fitness if they wanted to. Once again, using this card action, however, would exhaust this card, and they couldn't use it more than once per round. After every player has taken 1 basic action and a paid action if they want to, the first player would then move their stage marker to the next day, and then begin the same process again, where each player, in turn order, will select a main action and, if they want to and can afford it, a paid action. After every player has taken their actions on Thursday, it would then move into the weekend, and players would take part in match day. During match day, for the first few rounds, the game recommends that each player goes step by step and you wait for the other players until everyone is more familiar with the game. Once everyone is more familiar with the game, you can resolve match day simultaneously. And during match day, each player must follow 3 separate procedures. First, they'll prepare for the match, then they'll resolve the match, and then check the results of the match. The first step is preparing for the match. You can first do this by reading the scouting report of the opposing team. This scouting report will tell what formation the team will play in, as well as the team's general strategy and potentially players to look out for. This card indicates that this team will play a 4-3-3 formation, meaning that the opponent will have 4 defenders, 3 midfielders, and 3 forwards. The scouting report will not, however, tell you exactly which zone of each section that the players will be playing in. Each pitch or field board will have 9 total zones and 5 different sections. The 5 different sections are central defenders, central midfielders, central forwards, and then the 2 wings in each section as well. And there are 9 zones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and this will become important when you're resolving the match, which we'll look at in more detail in a moment. The players will then pick 1 tactic card from their hand and play an indicated formation based on the tactic card. Each basic formation tactic card gives you 2 choices for which formation you would like to play. There are other tactic cards that can be gained during the game that will give you potentially different formations as well as an effect that can be applied on the right side of the card as well. For instance, this card would allow one player that's assigned to the match the possibility of gaining 2 temporary strength for the match, or potentially getting injured after the match, depending on what's rolled on the player die. In this instance, we'll select a 4-2-4 formation. After selecting your tactic card, and in our example we selected a 4-2-4, you can place your players in each of the 9 different zones, just making sure that you follow the rules of your formation. In general, you can have 1 to 3 players in each of the central zones, and up to 1 player in each of the wing sections of the 3 different levels. So for instance, if I wanted to, in this bottom middle zone, I could have 3 players there and I would still meet my 4-2-4 requirement. In this situation, I think I'll have 1 player out here in the wing and leave 2 players in the middle. In the middle section, I could move one of my players out to the wing, either on the left or the right, but I wouldn't be able to place 2 players in a wing section, as you can only have up to 1 player. After reading the scouting report, picking your tactic, and then assigning your players to the different positions, you get to select which players will play during the match from your player cards. To be able to allow a player to play during the match, you have to assign 1 strength resource to that player to be able to activate them during the match. In addition, you can't play more than 1 player that has the same number. So in our example, we would have to pick one of these 2 players to activate for the match. We couldn't play 2 players both with a number 10. In our example, we'll pick this player to try and give them some experience and gain victory points. This player, since they're not able to play, could be placed down below the player board in the bench to indicate that they're not in the game. We could show that we're assigning this player a strength to allow them to play, and since we have an untrained youngster, we won't spend the resource to activate them during the game. This is because they only have 1 strength, and each jersey, if a player is not assigned, has a base strength of 1. So assigning a resource to this player would be somewhat of a waste. There are also some players that have abilities that can be activated during the match, and these abilities might have additional costs that must be paid for, in addition to paying for the cost to activate the player for the match. So for instance, if we were to play a player like this and wanted to use them in the match, we would assign 1 physical resource to them. And then in addition, if we wanted to activate their ability during the match, we would have to assign another physical resource in addition to the resource used to just let them play. In a similar way, with this player, we would have to assign 1 physical resource to let them play in the game, and then an additional 2 resources to utilize their ability during the game to score a goal. If you want to assign a player whose jersey marker is on the bench area, you can swap it out with any jersey marker that doesn't currently have a player marker assigned, but you can never flip a jersey marker unless you acquire a player that allows you to flip that marker when hiring a new player, or if some card effect specifically allows you to flip a jersey marker. It's also important to note that you cannot assign a player to a game if they have an injury token or a suspension token on their player card. You then must resolve any cards that have a before the match effect, like this Gonzalez player. To resolve this effect, you would roll your 6-sided die and follow the instructions on the card. It's important to note that if you don't assign a player card to the match that has a before the match ability, you don't resolve those effects. Also, if you were to have any player that had a suspension or an injury token on them, before the match you'd be able to remove one of those tokens. It is important to note that there's another type of player known as a goalkeeper. Players can acquire goalkeepers just like any other player card, and even though they have a number, they're not represented by a jersey. Goalkeepers would have to be activated using resources just like every other player, but they wouldn't have to have a jersey assigned. It would just be assumed that they're playing. Goalkeepers have a unique stat indicated by these numbers of gloves, and they also have a strength. During the match, any unblocked shot from the defenders on the field could be blocked by a goalkeeper if the attacking player has a strength equal to or less than the goalkeeper, and this can be done up to the number of times that there are gloves on the goalkeeper's card. So for instance, this goalkeeper, if assigned and playing during the game, could block up to 2 shots, each with a strength of 2 or less, which will make more sense here in a moment when we talk about the strength when comparing zones. If players don't have a goalkeeper card that they assign during the game, you're allowed to resolve the goalkeeper effect as if you had a goalkeeper with a strength of 1 and 1 glove. And finally, you can assign 1 fan to each one of the stands that you have if you want to. You can also assign just 1 or just 2 fans, Or you could assign all 4 if you've built stands 3 and 4. And if you do assign 4 fans to the stands, you'll be playing in a sold-out stadium, which may allow you to activate some card effects. After the match is over, you'll gain 1 cash for each fan that is in the stands. After you've completed all of the preparation for the match, it's then time to resolve the match. To do this, you would first reveal the opponent card. After revealing the card, if players have another tactic besides the one that they assigned at the start of the match, they could then play that tactic and just use its right side effect. After doing that, the player would take both played tactic cards back into their supply. They would then be able to use those tactic cards again in future weeks. Then, players would be able to choose player cards with assigned resources and resolve those cards' effects. When a player's ability has been used, the player would be exhausted, similar to a staff card that uses their ability during the round. And players can use as many player abilities as they want to, as long as the required ability resources were assigned during preparation for the match. When resolving a match, a player will compare the 5 different sections on their field board against the 5 different sections on their opponent's card. The sections are the 2 wings, and then the 3 central sections here. And when comparing zones, they will be mirrored on your opponent's card. For instance, your left wing will compare against their right wing. Your central forwards will compare against their central defenders. This central zone will compare against that central zone. Your defenders will compare against their forwards, etc. And within each section, you will pair players up to see if any goals are scored. The resolution of pairs would go like this. First, any player that has this soccer ball symbol will attempt to score a goal. If they're paired against a player that has this shield symbol, and this shield symbol player's strength is higher or equal to the player that's trying to score, that shot would be blocked. If a player who's trying to score has a strength that's higher than whatever defender they're paired against, or if they're not paired against a defender at all, the goalie would then have a chance to potentially block that shot as well, if their strength were equal to or higher than the player who's shooting the shot, and they still had gloves left to defend against those shots. If a player's shot gets through and a goalie is unable to defend against the shot, then a goal would be scored. And you would resolve each pair like that to see how many goals are scored in each section. As a reminder, each player, if they're not playing a goalie card, would be assumed to have a goalie with a base strength of 1 and 1 glove, and we'll remember that as we go through this example. One other thing to note is that the game wants you to resolve pairs within a section in such a way that the fewest goals possible are scored. So in our example here, we would first compare the left wing to our opponent's right wing. There are 2 players with a shield symbol, so nothing would happen there, but there is one of our players who's trying to score against an opponent who has a strength of 2. We're pairing this base strength of 1 player against this strength of 2 because we're trying to follow the rule of the game to allow the fewest goals possible. So no goals would be scored on this wing section. Now we'll compare our right wing against our opponent's left wing. We're going to be following the rule to allow the fewest goals possible. To accomplish this, we'll first compare their attacker with a strength of 1 against our defender with a base strength of 1. Since their strength is equaled, that defender will block the shot and no goal is scored. We also have a player who's trying to score a goal with a strength of 1, and will pair against their defender with a strength of 1, so that shot is blocked as well. We now have to resolve their remaining attacker with a strength of 3, however. We don't have any player left to defend that shot. We do still have a goalie that hasn't blocked a shot yet, but goalies can only block a shot if their strength is equal to or higher whoever is shooting on goal. Since we have a generic goalie with a base strength of 1 and 1 glove, this shot would get through and the opponent would score 1 goal. We'll now compare our central forwards against their central defenders. We have one player who's attempting to score with a strength of 1. That's blocked by one of their defenders with a strength of 2. We also have another player, Esposito, who's trying to score with a strength of 2 as well. However, they have another player up here with a strength of 2 that's defending, so that shot is blocked. They have an undefended attacker now who's going to attempt to score with a base strength of 1. However, we still have a goalie that hasn't used their defense yet, and they have a base strength of 1 as well. So that player's shot is blocked. It's important to note that since our goalie has blocked a shot, they can't block any other shots on goal. We'll now compare our central midfielders versus their central midfielders section. They have an attacker with a strength of 2 against our defender with a base strength of 1. Since that strength is higher, That shot would get through and our goalie can't defend anymore, which means they would score another goal. We also have an attacker, however, that's undefended. So that shot will go towards the goal. However, they have a goalie who hasn't blocked anything yet with a strength of 2, which means that that shot would be blocked. Now that that goalie has been used, if there were any more shots, the goalie wouldn't be able to defend them for our opponent's team. And finally, comparing their central forwards to our central defenders, they would have one player trying to score a goal with a strength of 1, and we have 2 players to defend that shot, so no more goals would be scored, which means that the match would end in a 2-0 loss for our team currently. It is possible that a match can end in a draw. After all of this has been resolved, you would then resolve any after-the-match effects on any player cards that you may have. Then you'll move the team markers for both of the teams in the match on the league table. 3 spaces for a winner, 1 space for a draw, and 0 spaces for the loser, so our team marker would stay where it is for now. If 2 or more players were to play against the same opponent during a week, then after moving the marker as described, you would flip it to its black inactive side. Players would remove any fans that were assigned to the stands and gain 1 cash for each fan that was assigned, and then they would discard these tokens to the supply. Players would also need to discard any temporary strength or weakness tokens that were assigned to players, while any permanent strength or weakness tokens would stay. Then you would need to make a match consequence roll by rolling your 6-sided die. After rolling the die, you would then find and apply the reward for the particular column, whether you lost, drew, or won. In our instance, since we lost and rolled a 6, we would get to assign 2 temporary strength to any player that played in the game. If we had rolled this symbol, we would have to apply 1 temporary weakness to any player card that was assigned to the match. If players were to roll this symbol, they would get to train 1 player that was assigned to the match. If they roll this symbol, they're allowed to increase the fan stat marker by 1. And if they roll any of these symbols, they have to apply injuries. When applying a single injury symbol, the players would roll the 12-sided die. The result would indicate which player would become injured, and you would have to place an injury token on that player card if they were assigned to the match. If you roll a number that doesn't line up to any player that was assigned to the match, then nothing would happen. So in our instance, since we don't have a player card for number 5, nothing would happen in that case. If you were to have to resolve a serious injury with these 2 cross symbols, you would follow the same process, but you would place 2 injury tokens on the player card instead of 1 if you rolled a number for a player that was assigned. If you have to roll this symbol, that means resolving 2 separate injuries, which may end up putting 2 tokens on the same player if the die roll is the same. And if you have to resolve this effect, you have to resolve 2 separate double injuries. After players have made their match consequence roll, they then roll the 6-sided opponent dice for each opponent team that no one played against and move their team marker on the league table according to the result. So for instance, for this team, they would roll the die. That team would move 0 spaces. For this team, they would roll the die, that team would move 1 space. For this team, they would roll the die, that team would move 3 spaces, and so on until each team was rolled for. Once again, you only roll the dice if a team wasn't played by a player. If a team marker is on its inactive side, you would flip it over instead of moving it. After the match day, players would then do the end of the week steps, where they would resolve all of these steps in order. First, players would unexhaust every exhausted card. They'll then reset the score markers down to 0 and discard any resources that they assign to players if they haven't already. They'll discard the opponent card that they played against, and then they'll check their position on the maintenance tracks, and you'll pay cash equal to the different levels of each maintenance track. So in this instance, they would have to pay 1 cash for the green players, 1 cash for the green staff, and then 2 cash for the stadium infrastructure. For each cash that they don't have, they have to place 2 suspension tokens on a staff card. So in our case, we could pick any one of our 3 staff cards and place a suspension token on them. And you have to pick a staff member that doesn't already have a suspension token to place one on if possible. Players can then keep at most 1 of each of the 3 resource types that aren't cash. And at this stage, players would want to discard any tokens placed on their boards as reminders. Players would then discard the rightmost player, staff, and sponsor cards. They would move all those cards to the right and then fill in the empty spot from each respective deck. And finally, they would discard the top card from the Youngster deck. The stage marker would then be passed to the next player in clockwise order, and they would become the first player and begin the next round by placing the marker on the Monday space of their club board. At the end of 6 weeks, the game would be over and then you would resolve final scoring. Then, players would score victory points based on their position on the league table. If 2 or more teams are tied for the same position, they both score the indicated number of victory points. Players would then score from any tokens they have from Youngsters and other card effects. They would score for each staff card based on the sets. In this case, they would score 5 for this set, 2 for this set, 2 for that set. They would score for any points they have on all of their stadium upgrades, as well as their position on the office track, and then they would lose 1 point for each suspension token that they have on any player cards or staff cards. Players will also score points for their objective cards. In our example, we've met both of the conditions on the card for a perfect objective score of 4. Alright everybody, that was our video. Hopefully it was helpful and hopefully it was informative. If you still have any questions at all about how to play the game, please comment below or email me directly at thedicey@gmail.com, and I'll do my best to answer those questions if I can. You can always connect with us on social media or by visiting our Board Game Geek Guild, and if you enjoy what we do, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon to make sure that you're notified whenever I post new content. Alright, thanks so much for watching everybody. Until next time, I'll see you at the table.